This is Only with Clara's Canning, and today we're actually canning something. Cooking and canning with my grandma Clara at her little house in Rural City are some of the best memories I have. And now I'm on a mission to preserve local food systems and traditions. By combining my lifetime of professional culinary and farming experience with generations of knowledge to bring you a fountain of skills and recipes to sustain and pass down. We are getting to the very bottom of food from the ground up, so I hope you'll join us. As you may have noticed, we ain't in the double wide no more. Recently, my family and I had to move to New Mexico, but I will be making frequent trips to film up here in beautiful Pacific Northwest Washington, so we're gonna be using a guest kitchen sometimes. And what a lovely space it is. It's spring, things are growing, so we're gonna can some pickled asparagus. Pickled asparagus is one of my favorites, and it was a Clara's classic, so we had to do it on the show. And lucky for us, Cabrera Farms had some gorgeous asparagus available at the farmer's market this week. That's a big bunch. That's a big bunch. Okay, we're gonna call that good. When I was a kid growing up, we would go out to my family's house in Eastern Washington, and along the ditches, asparagus grew, and especially at my Aunt Wanda's house, we would go out and cut the asparagus just right there off the ditch, tons of it. And we always pickled asparagus. This is a huge family classic. The recipe we're doing today is based on my family recipe, but we're not ready to share that yet. If you're new to home canning, I really suggest using a tried and true book like the Ball Complete Book of Home Preserving. In the back here, there's a chapter called The Art and Science of Home Food Preservation. In this chapter, you have all of the safety precautions and every little tidbit of info you need to produce safe home canned food. With cooking, I'd say experiment, do what you want. With canning, the recipe and procedures are extremely important, so follow them. Before we get started, you will need this specific set of tools. 1 jar funnel. They come in stainless steel or plastic, whatever your preference. A headspace measuring tool and debubbler. This tool has measurements on these little steps, and it measures your headspace, because headspace is very important. A magic wand or magnetic lid grabbing tool to lift your lids out of the hot water and not touch the gum side. And this tool you will not find in your standard set of canning tools, but I believe it is very important. This is a stainless steel ruler. I use it to measure ingredients before I put them in the jars, the water above the jars in the canning pot, and you can even use it for headspace. Before I wash and cut my asparagus, I want to measure it so that it perfectly fits inside my jar. I'm going to take my ruler, I'm going to stick it into this jar, and we're going to measure to this about right here. So that's looking like 5 1/4. So that means we want our asparagus cut to 5 1/4 inches. I'm going to cut it right about there. And this might look like a lot of waste, but the end bits of asparagus are pretty woody, so they wouldn't make a great pickle anyways. But what you can do is peel these little stems and cook them however you like asparagus and eat them. Now we can deband our asparagus and go ahead and get that washed. Asparagus is grown in sandy soil, so you really want to make sure it's washed well. A lot of people fear home canning, but when done correctly, there's nothing to be afraid of. Part of that is keeping a clean and tidy workspace and sanitizing frequently. You can use something like rubbing alcohol or a food-safe dilution of bleach. Make sure you're buying a standard disinfectant bleach with no fragrances or other additives. A food-safe dilution is 2 teaspoons per gallon or half a teaspoon per quart or 32 ounces of water. And make sure that you actually use measuring spoons and measure it out correctly. correctly. Because yeah, bleach is food safe, but only when in the exact proper dilution. And if you forget what I just said, the dilution rates are right here on the back of the bottle. So while we prep everything else, we're going to grab our washed jars with our jar tongs, and you want to make sure that you're getting underneath that lip with the tong. You need to get them down into the boiling water for at least 10 minutes to sterilize them. And when you're putting a jar in the water, make sure you tip it at an angle and let it slowly fill at first before putting it down upright. If you were to take a jar and just shove it straight down into the water, it can create quite a dangerous bubble that will send boiling water shooting out at your hand. By putting them in at an angle, you eliminate that. These need to boil for at least 10 minutes to be sterile, but I just like to plop them in and go ahead and work on my other prep, and then I know for sure they've been boiled for 10 minutes. But you should probably set a timer. Although these lids are brand new and we just took them off a fresh jar, they're already quite indented, if you can see in that gum. So unfortunately, we can save these for freezing foods or dry storage, but for really safe canning, you're gonna wanna crack into a fresh box and grab a brand new lid. Because now, that gum is perfectly plump and ready to seal. In this pot, we have some water and just a tiny splash of distilled vinegar over medium-low heat. And we're gonna gently bring that up to a mild simmer, but we don't wanna hard boil these lids. We just wanna soften the gum along this edge so that it makes a good seal. To our stock pot here, we need to make our brine. So we're gonna add 4 cups of distilled white 5% acidity vinegar and 4 cups of water. So that means this is a 50-50 brine. To our 50% water, 50% distilled vinegar mixture, I'm going to add half a cup of sea salt. You can use canning, pickling, kosher salt if you like. I personally prefer sea salt. Now we're just gonna go ahead and get this over medium or medium-high heat until the salt is dissolved, but don't let it boil away or evaporate too much. This recipe calls for garlic cloves, but do you know what's in season right now? Green garlic. And I found this excellent green garlic at Flynn Farms booth at the farmer's market. So that's what we're gonna use instead. You can go ahead and use a regular garlic clove if that's what you like. To prep, all I'm going to do is cut that little root nub off, cut the head of the garlic off. This is actually a tiny head of garlic. You can just barely see the little cloves forming in there. And to me, each of these is equivalent to about 1 clove of garlic. And then I'm just gonna cut a few little lengths of this. And I think probably 1 of these per quart chopped up. You can kind of treat the remainder tops like leeks. You don't really wanna get into these leaves. They get a little bit woody, but from about here to here, that's good eating. You could make green garlic and potato soup. You can pickle these. You can chop them up and saute them as if they were garlic or any number of things. So do not throw these out. This recipe kind of classically calls for dill seed, but again, guess what's in season right now? Fresh dill, which dill seed has a little bit different of a flavor. So I like to mix some dried dill weed and fresh dill. If you happen to have some dried dill flowers on hand, those are my absolute favorite, and you can add about 1 of them per quart. Otherwise, we're gonna do this classic mix of fresh dill and dried dill. Per quart, we need, I don't know, I'm just gonna kind of rough chop this. It looks pretty in the jar too. Set that aside right there, ready to get stuffed in a jar. The other thing about canning is once you're packing the jars, it is a quick process. You want to make sure all of your ingredients or your mise en place are ready to go. We have peppercorns, we have our dill and our dill. We have chili flake, we have pickling spice, we have mustard seed, and we have our prepped garlic. So we're basically ready to get stuffing. It is really important, especially with such lovely countertops as these, that you put down a towel before you place hot jars on a cold stone counter, because the temperature differential can easily shatter your jar. And how sad would that be? Make sure that when you're grabbing your jars out of the pot that you pour through this large side of the tong and not the small side, because the hot water can travel up these tines and burn you. Now we are ready to get stuffing. In first, I'm gonna go with our green garlic. Next, we're gonna go in with some fresh dill, which is about 2 tablespoons, but honestly, what's a tablespoon when we're talking about fresh herbs? A little one of those, you know? Next, to each jar, we're gonna add 1 teaspoon of peppercorns. This time, for whatever reason, I decided to go with the little 4 peppercorn mix, but you can just go ahead and use black if that's what you like. 1 teaspoon of yellow mustard seeds per quart. Oh, that already smells so good. There's something about hot jars and the spices where it just starts to like really do something. I'm gonna do a scant 1/4 teaspoon of chili flake per jar because my son really likes my pickled asparagus, but he does not like spice all that much yet. But you can go up to 1 or 2 tablespoons per jar if you really want it hot. Next, we're gonna do 1/2 tablespoon of pickling spice per jar, which, to be honest, pickling spice is in my Aunt Lisa's recipe and she's the queen of canning, so we honor that. But I will say this, pickling spice has always been kind of funny to me because the big spices are on top and the small spices go to the bottom, so you could be getting any kind of thing when you put a teaspoon or a tablespoon or a heaping tablespoon or whatever in there. What if one jar gets 5 allspice berries and another jar gets none? I'm gonna let it go. I'm gonna let it go. Pickled my brain. I'm just kidding. All right, now we're just going to go ahead and pack our asparagus gently and neatly in the jar. At first, I like to kind of tip it in one direction and give it a little tap, and eventually everything kind of evens out in there. Packing the jars nicely is a serious art. And if you really don't want to do it like this, you can also cut your asparagus into about 1.5 2-inch pieces and just kind of toss them in, but who doesn't love a perfect pickled asparagus spear? That's looking pretty good to me, except I see a little bit of wiggle room over here that we're gonna fill. Make sure to keep an eye on your pots. You don't want things just going and everything's evaporating and yada yada. So that looks pretty nice to me. Next jar. Once upon a time, and way more frequently, they used to make these taller, I think they're 24-ounce jar, no. Yeah, I think they are 24-ounce jars, but they're wide mouth and they're tall, and those are like the asparagus jars, but a little bit hard to find nowadays. You can maybe find them online, and if so, I definitely recommend those, but otherwise, these plain old wide mouth quarts work just fine. We have our hot brine ready to go. And cutest little dinosaur ladle. We are gonna add our canning funnel and fill these to 1/2 inch headspace. You can change this recipe depending on how much asparagus you have. The brine formula that I have come up with is that you will need anywhere from 2 to 3 cups of brine per quart, and this is a 50-50 brine. And per those 8 cups, or 1/2 gallon, I use 1/2 cup of salt. So you can increase or decrease that as the amount of asparagus you have depends. And I've worked this brine formula out for pints, quarts, and a couple different kinds of things because sometimes we aren't working with entire cases of food and we need these recipes to be a little bit more formulaic instead of exact. And I will go ahead and link my brine formula in the description below. I guess I'll just go ahead and pop it on my blog, on my website that I don't really update anymore, but for y'all I will. Oof, you know what? She got that good brine math. Y'all gonna make me lose my brine. Okay, we're gonna do 1/2 inch. So pour that until it just barely touches the tip of the measure. Oop, get down in there. Sometimes also this measure is kind of a good little tool to stuff these little suckers back down. Okay, 1/2 inch. Oh my God, vinegar vapor. These all look good. I'm gonna go ahead and clear this out. Okay, now we need to go ahead and take our debubbling tool and just wiggle it around, and you see all those little bubbles coming up in there. Air bubbles in your jars when canning are not good. They could potentially give bacteria a place to thrive. I have a paper towel here that I've folded up into probably about 1/8. I've dipped it in some hot water, and we're gonna go ahead and clean the rim of this jar where the lid will make contact and the threads of the jar. Anything on top of these rims could affect the seal, and little bits of food right there could rot in storage, and that will cause you problems. So this whole process needs to be extremely clean. And I know some people be using rags. I like paper towels because, as my professional food training has taught me, paper towels are single use and there's no bacteria in them. Now, we have our lids. We're just going to plop them on. Rings go on until they stop turning naturally, and then just a 1/4 turn. The tightness of your lids really matters. It's what will create a proper or improper seal, and it can be dangerous if your jars are too tight. So you put the ring on until it naturally stops spinning, about a 1/4 turn, and that's it. Too tight, danger. Too loose, yuck. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and grab our jars and get them into our water bath canner. And I just use like a wood spoon or something to keep these handles up, but to be honest, I so rarely lift the entire rack of jars out by those handles. I've started to remove them from most of my canning racks. You want to make sure that you find a spot for your jars on the rack where it's not going to tip, it's not tilted sideways. Jars need to be straight up and down to can properly. It is completely crucial that you have at least 1 inch of water above the jars in your canner, but no more than 2 inches of water. By looking at this, I for sure thought this was more than 2 inches of water above these jars, so I thought I was going to have to remove some water. Then I took my ruler and found out, it's perfect. That's exactly where they need to be. And this is why we use tools. Okay, timer. 10 minutes on the timer, start. Now that our jars have processed for 10 minutes, we're going to turn the burner off and remove the lid and allow them to rest for 5 more minutes. It's been 5 minutes, our jars have rested, and now it's time to remove them from the bath. You want to make sure to set them on a towel and do not place your hot, freshly processed jars on a cold countertop. And right now the asparagus has definitely traveled upwards, but as it rests, they will settle right back down and all of the asparagus will be submerged in the pickling liquid. And now that our asparagus pickles are fully processed, make sure that you leave them on the towel to rest for 24 hours before you remove the rings and test the seal. To test the seal, all you're going to do is gently lift the jar up from the lid alone. If it stays on, it's sealed. If it falls off, it didn't seal. And then you want to gently wipe or rinse the jar and label it before storing it without the ring. I love pickled asparagus anywhere I like a normal dill cucumber pickle, next to a sandwich, in picnic salads, on charcuterie boards, and more. Canning pickled asparagus was a very fond childhood memory for me, and I want to know what your favorite pickles are. Let me know in the comments below. Like and subscribe!